Use, my friend, the second time appearance back on the podcast. I'm so grateful to have you back. And I'm so appreciative for you willing to come back. So thank you, my friend. I really appreciate you.
I'm so excited, man. This is like long, I don't want to say overdue, but like I've been just wanting to do this for a while.
Let's go, man. So before we were recording, you were talking about how you weren't a fan of 5 year plans or anything like that. And I wanted to ask you so much about that. So I'd love to get into it here. Why aren't you a fan of 5 year plans and take us through that?
Yeah, so like right before we started recording, I was like, Danny, could you imagine back in like 2018, we were kind of like messing around with drop shipping. You were watching my videos on YouTube, and like, who would have thought we would be here doing this today in the positions that we're in? So I feel like I've just never been a fan of 5 year plans because, especially since like this whole like technology age that we're in, things change so much faster than like in the 70s and the 80s. So I mean, maybe it's just me. Some personalities are different, but like I just don't think it's reasonable to have a 5 year plan. There's just way too many variables, at least for me. Like every 3 months, I'm practically a different person. So yeah.
How do you prepare for a world that's constantly changing?
Ooh, really good question. So actually, my website has been down for a while and I brought it back today. And this is actually like the first article I'm putting back. So, I mean, in simplest form, I would say switching the default mode of confidence from being in previous ability, like I'm confident because I've achieved these things. And like people kind of stand there like, this is who I am because I've achieved that. And in a world that's constantly changing, then, I mean, at least for me, that just all fucked up. Like you lose everything. What I'm trying to say, and I might be explaining poorly, is switching from previous ability as the gauge of confidence into adaptability. So instead of I'm confident because I know I have the answers for this situation, you switch it to I am confident because I know I can find or create the solutions once I'm exposed to the situation.
I love that. So were you always that type of person, or was that something you've developed?
Oh, absolutely not. Like I learned that the hard way. So with men in particular, we get so much of pretty much all, like the majority of our self-esteem comes from our level of competence and our capability as the form of masculine energy. This is why like men hate talking about problems, especially like with women, because the underlying implication, the subconscious interprets that as she's judging his competence and capability. She doesn't trust that he's competent or capable. This is why men avoid like talking about problems and why men isolate and they want to just be alone to solve their problems because they don't want to like have the world see that they're lacking in competence or capability. So to tie this in, what I'm saying is, so when I was 22, I had a lot of success. So I had lots of money, the car, all that. And that gave me then permission to believe that I had competence and capability. So naturally, I gave myself more permission to express myself, to state my opinions, to do things. But then, as you touched on right before this, right, the only constant is change. So what did work wasn't working. And now I was back in a situation where I needed to figure out new solutions to a new situation. And well, like as the saying goes, like when it rains, it pours. You get just like one loss, and then your whole self-esteem of who I was, like the competent, confident guy that has everything figured out, whew, downward spiral, lost everything. And so that taught me that instead of putting your like confidence and self-esteem in the default operating system of this is what I've done, that's who I am, I've sort of learned to rewire it. And it doesn't matter what the situation is, I'm confident in my ability to find or create the solution once I experience the scenario, get some feedback, and immerse myself in it.
Mm. So how could one go through that or get to that level of confidence without going through the torturous downfall? Is it possible?
Yeah, I mean, I just wrote an article on it. But like the simplest way to explain it is by default. So here's how beliefs work, right? This is the syntax of beliefs. There's a cause, there's an effect, and then there is the meaning that we associate to that. So as we go through life, we experience effects, and then our brain wants to find meaning to it. We want to understand what happened. So for example, you can get rejected or go through a failure, and your brain starts scanning for causes and meanings. So typically, which is unfortunate, the default mechanism to protect ourselves is I got rejected. Effect. Cause, it's because I attempted to do something. And then the meaning associated with it is I lack competence, I lack capability, therefore I am not good enough, is the default syntax of a belief. And what happens is our brain, or at least mine, and just I guess all the observations and the experiences, we just avoid doing things altogether. We avoid self-expression, we avoid trying new things, we avoid failing. So to answer your question, at least in my experience and just my observation, is you have to actually, like men and women, like all of us, we don't fear failure. We fear the meaning of it, because the meaning of it is like, it just shows us the truth of where we actually stand. And sometimes we're afraid to confront that. So this, I guess the way to answer that would just be like, the truth will set you free. Like you should want failure because it shows you within the failure are the gems that will sort of give you more competence and capability.
And when I hear that, I think of wanting to attach more of what we value on the causes as opposed to the effects. The cause being, I put in X amount of reps. So instead of getting attached to the effect of I'm a bad person, you say to yourself, I haven't put in enough reps yet to achieve what I want to achieve. Does that make sense and tie in at all?
Yeah. And like every time you do something, like, I don't know, when you do this for a while, right, you actually equally value, in fact, you almost value failure more than you value success. You actually get more excited. It sounds super bullshit, like woo woo, but here's the reason why, right? So it takes time, of course, just like building muscle in the gym, you build the muscles in your brain to kind of rewire this way. But it sounds weird, but here's why. Because when you succeed, you're just being reflected that you're competent and capable. But when you fail, it shows you and gives you data and like just gems of wisdom in which you can become more competent and capable. So within failure are the gems to actually level up your competence and your capability. Success is just kind of showing you how good you are, but it's actually in the failure that makes you better. So it's a weird way to look at it.
Could you take us through that time in your life when you're 22 and you have everything and then you have nothing, and how that affects your psyche moving forward and what exactly you're doing to get back on the right path?
Yeah, I mean, that was, let's see, like I'm an old man now. I was like four
How
years
old are
ago.
you?
25.
Yeah.
I'm an old man, but I mean, I feel like a lot of guys go through this in some variation or another, maybe not as extreme, but all of my confidence was reliant on external things back then. Like I would achieve things and that would be who I was. So as those things started to go away, as I kind of touched on earlier, men withdraw, men isolate. We don't want people seeing us lacking competence or capability in all forms, in mating strategies, partners, all of that, because I guess man's esteem and masculinity is in his competence and capability. So things were very external back then.
Yeah. So when you say men's, they're attached to the competence and their capabilities. What is women's role according to you?
Well, according to the book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, there's a quote I really like from there, and that's men are afraid of giving, women are afraid of receiving. And what that means is the reason men are afraid of giving is just the word used kind of like for outward expression, right? It's so crazy when you think about it. Like when a guy wants to start a business, you're literally trying to give value to people in exchange for value. Or when someone's
Oh,
trying to start a personal brand, you're literally trying to give value to people. And why is that scary? It's not scary. It's because negative feedback will affect a man's sense of what his competence and capability is. So that's why men fear giving and men fear self-expression. Women, that's not as much of a problem. They're more willing to look goofy and stilly, and they're more okay with that. But women more so fear receiving. And for a while, when I was working in like sales and I was taking sales calls, the women I would talk to for this like business coaching thing, that like some company I was working for, but almost all of the women had a problem with charging a high enough price or asking for money or making the sale, because they're the opposite. They want to give and give and give, but they sometimes like feel unworthy of receiving, or like, am I really that good type of thing. So yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. I never thought about life in that perspective. And it's really interesting because I think that in 2021, people are afraid to break down men's and women's roles because they're scared about how they're portrayed and how they're viewed for cancel culture or whatever it is. Why do you think you're so willing to state what you think the roles are or how men and women perceive their energy, and why are you so forward with that?
Yeah, maybe it's just because like I really believe in it. Like when I said that, I didn't even cross my mind like the whole cancel culture thing. Because when I look at things, I truly like, I don't know, man. Like when some people are picking sides, it's like they don't even think about what side it is. Like Democrat, Republicans, like football. It's like football teams. Just
Yeah.
it's like there's no logic behind it. But I put time and thought into like the opinions I formulate, and I do actually understand the other side. Like I think we can all agree that like a soul is both masculine and feminine, but it is my opinion we incarnate here as either man or women, and then of course there's a spectrum of masculinity and femininity. But yeah, I guess that's why I'm so forward in the role, is because I put considerable amount of time and thought into formulating that opinion.
What is a soul?
Does it look like I have that answer? Maybe like in 100 years when I got like a white beard, I can give you that answer. But I think it's just the energy that permeates and fills your body,
Hmm.
and it never dies.
It never dies. And so we reincarnate. How are we reincarnating?
We're going down there. We're going down this path. To be honest, I'm not like an expert, but I have spent a decent amount of time like looking into it. So I kind of think, so you know how when you were a kid, like 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, five, six, you don't remember any of those things, but technically those memories are still in there. And sometimes you can get flashes and tap into it. I feel like, well, I've heard of documented experiences, multiple documented experience of people remembering the experience from their previous soul's existence.
Hmm.
So I do believe in the souls, and our souls have memory and things of that nature.
Yeah. So, like, what do you think? I've heard this from Joe Dispenza, right? He's talking about how he's living in this body, but then he recalls a situation when he was in a different body in a different time. What do you think you were doing in a different reincarnation or a different incarnation?
That's a really good question. And one theory that I, for now, am like going with because I just like how it sounds is that the skills that you're born with, because I do believe we're all born with like one or two things that are stronger than other people's things, on like the whole spectrum of categories of skills that we can have. And the theory that I'm sort of resonating with at the moment is that one thing that you're really good at is something that you were doing in a previous lifetime. So someone were like writing or music, or let's say music comes naturally. Maybe he was a musician in a past life, or somebody who's just really good at like speaking and communicating and writing was probably doing something like that in the past, or somebody really good with his hands and building things and figuring things out was doing something along those lines in a previous life. And then he's come and incarnated into this next version to level up other aspects or really refine that aspect, is the theory I'm going with for now.
Yeah, and one of the things that you've mentioned that you're extremely good at, and I know to be true, is persuasion, right? You're incredible at persuading people and coming from a place of love and giving them the information they need to help them make the best decision possible in any given moment. And so, what do you know about persuasion that the rest of us could learn?
This is a really good question. I love this question. First of all, the word, also like earlier when I was saying the words competence and capability, it's kind of like a folder on a computer. Like I'm just using a word to simplify like an entire category. So when people hear the word persuasion, it's associated with like deception, but persuasion is ultimately just communicating in an effective way in which you can like shift people's perspectives and beliefs. Now, if we want to get really funky here, if we want to go really outside the box, um, power is a double-edged sword. It can be used for good or evil against others, and it can be used for good or evil against yourself. So, and kind of like we see all the time in movies, right? There's the young apprentice. He has this crazy destructive power, and he has to learn how to control it before he can actually use it. So to give you the negative side of persuasion before I like learned about it, like easily that power was used on myself to persuade myself out of doing things I feared. Oh my
Mm.
God. Because I'm so good at changing perspectives, I changed my own damn perspective and like built bulletproof arguments to like make it seem like not taking action was the best thing. So power can be used against yourself. Like the person who's extremely good at creating can create problems or create solutions. All power is a double-edged sword, right? Internally and externally. So also externally, I can use it to deceive others, or I can use it to help others make perspective shifts that are in their own best interest. So, and if we want to get super like funky and outside the box, so I could actually say that I can't explain this well because it's just like a theory, but there's good guys and bad guys on both sides. So somebody has been gifted with persuasion. I want to call myself a good guy, but because I'm just too like I've measured it in personality tests and just the way I go about my life, I'm way too empathetic to use it negatively. Way, way, way too empathetic to use it negatively. Whereas someone who doesn't have the empathy, but also has the level of persuasion that I would have, would be able to use it for negative reasons. And the forces kind of coincide. Like there's all sorts of people using persuasion to lead people down bad paths, and there's the good guys, the angels and demons that are leading people towards good paths. And to answer your question about like things about persuasion, first of all, again, like I measured this on personality tests and it's just like my default way of being. So on a scale of 0, just for everyone listening, because they might have not seen my tweet about it, but on personality tests, like it will give you a spectrum of 0 to 100. So my lowest skill is 21 out of 100, and that's like building things and being hands-on. My highest skill was the persuasion, communication, influence category, and that's 100 out of 100 is where it was ranked. So I've never studied it in books or anything, but if I could guess, potentially on top of maybe the spiritual stuff, but a more logical approach for the less spiritually inclined, is from a young age, I experienced like rejections, and my brain wired to avoid confrontation. So instead of directly having to say what I wanted, my brain had to learn to like get people to come to my side indirectly. Instead of telling people 4, I learned to give 2 plus 2. They would conclude 4 and then have that perspective shift. So everything I've learned about persuasion is just reverse engineering my own experiences. Because even when I was a young kid, like 12, I was always posting on forums. I was always, here's the problem though. All right, let's get into this, Daniel. I'm excited. Here's the problem, right? Is I wasn't like the most alpha guy or like the leader type or the CEO type, but the problem was because I was so good at communicating a vision. We're going here, we're doing this. This is why things aren't working. We need to do it differently. I would effortlessly build followings. I'm talking like when I was 12 years old on video games and forums. People would all come to me, and then naturally that puts you in the position of being the leader and the CEO. So like I was put captain of the crew, I was put leader of everything, but that's actually not like my main role. So it ended up causing problems, if that makes sense.
Oh my God, there's so much to unpack here. So how does that make you feel? We got to go into the persuasion. Like,
Please.
how do you persuade someone? Like, how do you take someone? How are you 12 years old and persuading people to join your clan? How are you 25 years old and persuading people to look at spiritual texts without even trying to do that, which I know you've done in the past? How do you persuade someone to better? How do you persuade someone better?
Yeah, let's get into it. So by the way, again, I'm not a fan of like here's the thing that I also want to let people know, just to give me some credibility for people for their first time listening. Like I've never used or looked up marketing strategies. When I would upload videos on YouTube and all of my tweets just off the top of my head, no keyword optimization, nothing, and built like 70,000 on YouTube and 20,000 on Twitter, just things off the top of my head, zero strategy. So I kind of reverse engineered, like, why the hell is this so effective? And then I've come to the insights as to being persuasive. So number one that I want to give as a takeaway is, like I said, I lean more towards, or way too much actually, towards the empathetic side, sometimes to a fault. So I've never actually used it negatively for deception, which means my frame is that the easiest way to persuade somebody is not have to persuade them, which means just have what they want. Right? Like to me, it's just much easier if I just have what somebody wants and then says, hey, I have what you want. And something I've been saying a lot recently is you can either spend time becoming compelling or spend time being convincing, time and
Mm.
energy. You can either nurture your garden, level yourself up, become more compelling, or if you neglect doing that, then you're going to have to spend all of your time running around and chasing and being convincing. So one of my core pillars, the foundation of like my persuasion philosophy that I've sort of self-created, is just have what people want. So that way you don't have to convince. You pretty much just show up and, hey, I'm here. Now I'll give you another one that it could be used negatively, but I doubt it. I'm not going to give that much detail. Um, like I said, when I was younger, I had an aversion to confrontation. So I learned how to get people on my side without ever being direct. A big problem people make, content creators, is at times they can be way too direct. For me, I use being direct intermittently, and like I try to be indirect. Why? Because it's the greatest thing you can ever do for people. Because instead of telling them what to think and making them reliant on you, you're encouraging them how to think. Instead of having them be an inactive spectator that you're talking at, they're an active participant you are talking with. Instead of saying four, you give 2 + 2. You lead them to the conclusion instead of doing the concluding for them, right? And another thing is sometimes you want to intentionally leave things out to leave room for interpretation. So again, I didn't study any of this or learn any of this. I'm like reverse engineering what works for me, but apparently this is what psychics would do. What psychics do is it's crazy how this works. They will say something that sort of applies to a bunch of people, but then they leave just enough room for interpretation. And naturally, the person fills in the interpretation with their own experience, and they don't even realize they were the one that filled the interpretation. So then they're like, wow, this guy gets me so much.
Wow. That is mind blowing. I want to go back to, you're now put in this role of being the leader, but that's not who you naturally are in your soul, it seems like. So how does that feel from your perspective? And
Well, at first,
how do you
yeah.
get around that?
Yeah. So at first, again, a lot of things I've been tweeting recently is all about just like congruence. When you understand who you are, you can put yourself in the best position that aligns with just your natural ways of being and your strengths. So at first, it was very frustrating because in my head, I would quit everything I would start. And it was very annoying. I was like, I'm just being a pussy. I need more discipline. I need more willpower. I need more motivation. And to be fair, I guess like trying to brute force my way through things like did sort of level up discipline and willpower and motivation. But at the same time, I was just not doing things that I was aligned to be doing. Like I'm not aligned to be the CEO, leader, administrative type. I hate that. Hate it. Because the way my mind works is creative. So I like to really understand the problem and create a solution that's different than all the inadequate solutions currently out there. Also, it has to be something that I'm personally working with. So like when I was a personal trainer, all I cared about was like health and body stuff. When I was marketing, all I cared is about that stuff. But the second I figure out the solution, whew, like I get bored. I think that's a big reason why I quit YouTube, by the way, right? So I came in and I was like, this is a different way to do things. This is a different way to look at things. And I showed people my solution. And then I was now in a box. Like, this is the e-commerce expert. And I'm like, fuck that. Like, I want to just find the next solution. So then I moved to health things, and then I moved to business things. And that's how my brain works. And if you want to use Carl Jung style archetypes, it's actually known as the jester archetype. So when people think about the jester, they think about like some clown or some dunce. And yeah, the jester was part entertainment. Like humor has always kind of come naturally to me. But what people don't know about the jester is that it is actually in the tarot deck. It is simultaneously the highest ranking card and the lowest ranking card because it has no number. And what people don't understand about the jester is that the problem with kings is that they were surrounded by yes men. So the jester actually acted as an advisor that would point out blind spots that nobody was telling the king. But because he was so good at indirect communication, he found a way to lead the king to that conclusion without offending him by telling him that he was wrong, if that makes sense.
Has that ever happened in your own life?
What specifically?
Like pointing out to someone who was supposedly in power the right way to do things indirectly?
Oh boy.
You don't have to use names or anything like that if you're thinking of a situation.
No, because you actually brought up a really good point, which I want to kind of go back to. So you remember when I said like power is a double-edged sword and we have to learn how to control it or bad things can happen. So like I said, I have really good intentions, but good intentions doesn't always mean good outcomes. So again, a problem was back when I was doing like agency work and helping people with their Google ads and Facebook ads and stuff like that. People would buy into the vision like, wow, this is such a good thing. We need to do this. This is different. This is what's going to make us win. But then when it comes time to doing like the hands-on technical work, not my thing. So it led to negative outcomes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, that does. So what do you do on a day-to-day basis today, Yus? I feel like you're a mystery man. I don't even know what you're up to. You just post some incredible writings and I don't even know what you're doing on the day-to-day.
Yeah, like I don't know. I guess another reason back to the first question, like why I just don't like 5-year plans is because it seems like every 3 to 6 months I was changing what I was doing. Because as we kind of touched on earlier, like figuring out like what actually makes the most sense for my role. And I guess now I'm in like a transition period where I just wrapped up something and I keep getting gravitated and pulled towards like taking my content more seriously and writing articles and making videos again. I keep getting pulled in that direction. No matter how hard I try to fight it or try to resist it, I keep getting pulled back there. And that really made me consider like there's a quote or saying, or whatever the hell it is, like what's yours will find you and you can't lose what is yours. And I feel like I keep having a bit of success with opportunities and then like getting bored and letting it slip because I keep trying to like get moved back into the thing that's always worked for me. So that's where I'm at right now.
What draws you to content, putting your thoughts out online so much?
That's a really good question. And I've considered it actually, like, because I mean, I don't, at the moment, I don't monetize in any way. So I don't get anything out of it. It's all just like off the top of my head as I'm going throughout the day. And I feel that's just a natural human instinct, which is, and it's the hero's journey. If you like study film and storytelling, it is the hero's journey where the hero goes, blah, 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 solves a problem. But at the end of the journey, he returns home with a message. This is what I learned. I was struggling with this and I finally cracked the code. Because I feel like so many solutions out there are inadequate. And I say that not because I'm so great and everybody's inadequate, but just because I was a consumer and like I would have problems and I would, what do we do when we have problems? We go on Google, we go on YouTube, and then you try it and it doesn't work. And you're like, I don't get it. And then the thing that really pisses me off, which is why I've been talking about this recently, is people's, what's the word I'm looking for? Like scapegoat, or the way they just kind of alleviate the blame is by saying, oh, he didn't want it bad enough. He wasn't motivated enough. He wasn't disciplined enough. And out of the entire spectrum of possibilities that could be the root cause for that symptom, yes, motivation, discipline, willpower is a solution, but it is not the solution. It will help you persist through a shitty solution for longer, but then you have to ask, why are you implementing a shitty solution? And this is where I always kind of found myself when I was searching for like anything, like how to fix shin splints or how to, what everybody's looking up, like how to make money online and stuff like that. I would always find shitty solutions. Like it just didn't work when I tried it. And there's so many people probably listening to this, like, yeah, like I go online, I just find a bunch of people just spewing general knowledge. And then occasionally they try something and it just doesn't work because there's that lack of personalization. You remember from last time, I'm big on nuance. I know some people don't like nuance, but it's absurd to me not to do nuance, because a shoe that fits one man will crush the foot of another man. And if he wears that shoe, like I wear a 10 and a half. If a guy who wears a 13 wears my shoe for a year, his foot will get maladapted traits and all messed up. So even if you do use willpower, force, resistance, motivation, having a strong why, and you wear that shitty shoe for long enough, you start developing maladapted traits, which leads you down the path of, I don't want to use the word committing, but committing one of the 7 deadly sins. What I mean by that is when you form these maladaptive traits, like for example, like I said, my lowest ranking skill is like hands-on assembly of things. If I just force myself to do that and use willpower to do that, I'm literally on a measurable scale 5 times worse at that than doing my best thing. So the people that are around me that are actually good at it, for them, it's easy. For them, they actually really understand what's going on. If I were to do that, I would be lacking so much skill and capability the brain would start to adapt and start implementing things like deception, envy, lying, hatred. Why am I working so hard, but that guy like barely has to try, type of thing.
It's really true that the best things seem to be effortless or come effortless. But at the same time, it seems from my perspective that you also need to assert some discipline. The example I'll use is like this podcast has come so effortlessly to me. But at the same time, I need to be disciplined to put out 3 episodes a week. Where do you find that balance between effortless activities and discipline? And am I thinking about this completely wrong?
No, you're totally right. And the thing here is, right, we're not trying to avoid discomfort like discipline, motivation, all that. It's more so just an optimization and not being dumb. Like in pretty much every war strategy book, they say the highest form of excellence in war is winning a war without a fight. And war costs so many resources. And by the way, I'm not even talking about physical war. War just meaning any conflict that you personally face wastes time, energy, resources. So like your energy will be drained, your time, your energy by fighting conflicts. So when you do enter a conflict, you better know like, okay, I know I need to do this and I know that's what I'm signing up for. So difficulty is not only like it's inevitable, it's unavoidable. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But at the same time, if you can win a war in 4 battles, why would you fight 24 battles? And the question I would always ask is like, discipline and motivation, all of that is a tool. If that's your entire engine, you probably have a problem. Like symptoms and feelings, like people say, don't be a bitch and your feelings and all that. Yeah, that's true. It is actually true. But at the same time, they didn't put that in people for no reason. God wasn't just bored. Let me just make people not have discipline and motivation, willpower. Feelings are just energy and data. It is data. If you are putting in above average work and getting below average results, I don't know about other people, but to me, that seems like a problem worth investigating.
How do you
And
figure it? How do you figure it out? Like, oh, this is average results, or like, let's use the podcast for example, right? On YouTube, getting about 25 YouTube views per video. That's average results. Is that not average results? Let's use like the practical of my situation for my own benefit.
yeah, in terms of like measurable metrics, the problem usually is with most people that I've observed is like I said, there's no personalization. There's
Yeah.
only productization. So if a person has a successful podcast, he will make Tony's podcast program, buy my course. But that's what worked for Tony,
Yep.
right? It's not what's going to work for Danny. Danny has to look at what was the most successful episode I've done, what was the not, and just look at all the factors. Then you pattern recognition, there's all this stuff in data, and you're like, oh, when I do this, the episodes do better. Here's a marketing strategy I can implement. You also have to look at like the numbers, right? So in marketing and then in the business world, I mean, anyone that doesn't do this is insane. Like if you have a marketing problem, or let's go to the beginning, like your offer, the product that you give people, no matter how good your sales is, it's not going to solve having an offer nobody wants. So that's like the foundation. But if you have an offer that a lot of people want and you're seeing a lot of people are checking out your landing page and watching your videos, but nobody's buying, then you deduce, you're like, maybe it's priced too high, or maybe I'm communicating it wrong. And if you talk to copywriters, they will tell you like sometimes all they do is change the headline and they go from having no sales to 5 figures in a weekend just by changing the headline. So looking at data, and I don't know, that's something I really just enjoy doing.
Have you always been attracted to data as a whole, or is that something that came because you wanted to persuade people?
Oh, absolutely not. And I've never wanted to persuade people ever. Like it just comes naturally to communicate my ideas in a way that's compelling. Because like I said, my default mechanism is work to become compelling. That way you never have to be convincing.
Mm. Yeah, and that I wanted to bring that up. It was like become the bullseye is greater than being the dart. That's like such a great way to frame that idea.
Yeah, it's the same as saying like nurture your garden, don't chase the butterfly. Because no matter what, you're going to have to exert time, energy, resources to get things done. So by nurturing your garden or becoming the bullseye, you position yourself aligned to your strengths. You still have like to do discipline and motivation and willpower and power through things, but you know it's the thing worth powering through. Like, for example, would you rather exert discipline building your kingdom, or would you rather exert discipline running around like a headless chicken chasing butterflies? Either way, both guys are exerting discipline. And what about the guy running around chasing the butterflies? He's feeling the symptoms of, man, things aren't working for me. I want to quit. What does he do? He goes on YouTube and you gotta hustle. You gotta not quit. You gotta not be a bitch. And like, he's like, all right, I'm just gonna run harder and faster. And like, but that's not the solution.
How do you find the right thing for you to focus on?
I'd say there's like a process, sort of a 3-step process, at least that has worked for me. Number one is just getting into the habit of reverse engineering your experiences. Major, like life-changing, insanely life-changing. And man, I don't want to go on like a tangent, but there's a conspiracy that like, this is just how we are wired. Like I said earlier, what to think instead of how to think. What do people do when they have a problem? The knee-jerk reaction is to hop on YouTube, listen to an influencer, type it on Google without even thinking about it or diagnosing their own symptoms. And that's just a huge problem. And here's a clear example to paint this, right? So a symptom would just be like low energy or depression. So what do people do? They Google it, and there's just this whole catalog of solutions. But because they don't do any sort of personalization to what their symptoms are, there's like a 95% chance they implement the wrong solution. Like I said earlier, 1 out of the spectrum of 1,000 solutions is like, don't be a bitch, try harder. And by the way, like I'm a very competitive athletic person. Like I love pushing myself. The reason I'm able to like downplay motivation and stuff so much is because like I just naturally have it. And I'm sick of people saying it's like the cure-all solution, right? If a guy has a thyroid problem, he needs to take care of his thyroid. Person's iron deficient, you going keto might not help. Like everyone just, because I guess it's a natural human bias, right? We struggle with something so much, we find the solution, and then we just neglect that other people are different and just say, this is the solution. I tried all the other solutions, but it was eating keto that cured it. But in reality, maybe he had a thyroid problem and that actually cured his thyroid problem, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So wait, were you going on 3 steps there? Did I miss the 3 steps?
Yeah. Thank you for reeling it back in. Yeah. So the first one is just analyzing your symptoms and really personalizing what you need and diagnosing yourself, and then using external resources as supplemental. And just like a muscle, intuition gets strengthened with use. You either use it or you lose it. It's going to atrophy if you don't use it. If every single time there's a problem, you just run to Google, your brain never has to like actually think about it. And there's just such a high probability you're going to get shitty results and implement a shit method. So number 1 is self-reflection. Make that a common practice. Number 2 is personality tests are a great supplemental resource to kind of confirm the hypotheses or just provide extra data, another data point for the hypotheses that you are coming up with. And then the third one, which I really, really like, is playing games with your friends that are questions based. That's like, it will change your life. I'm trying to like come up maybe with like a website or an app or something just loaded with like questions like that, but oh my God, it changes your life. Like for example, you play these games with your friends, like your close friends, possibly a little bit tipsy to make it more fun, but play these games like you pick up a card and then you say, what is your favorite thing about me? Or you pick up the card and go, what's one thing you think I need to hear that people are too afraid to tell me? Or another one, like, if you just met me today, what would you assume I do for a living? And just getting all that valuable feedback from the people closest to you. Sometimes you have no idea how you're coming across to people. And that's yet another data point in this sort of 3-step knowing yourself thing that we have just come up with here.
Yeah, I would add to those are 3 incredible resources. I would add one of looking at the most recent purchases you've made that are random and that maybe you don't have any price sensitivity towards. If you are spending money on self-improvement books or spending your time on podcasts, like why are you attracted to those podcasts? Why are you attracted to those books? Why are you attracted to those random things you're attracted to? And if you look at your purchase behavior, they'll tell you the story of you that might have gone under your own radar.
That's so true. That's a really good point. I actually do that. I just forgot to include it.
Yeah.
But that's fantastic.
So what are you price insensitive towards?
See, it's the way I'm wired. Maybe it's partly conscious effort, but like, I don't know. I just don't look at prices of anything ever. Unless it's like a car or a house, I just don't look at the price of anything ever. Maybe that sounds cool, like, oh, abundance mindset. To some extent, yeah. It could also be ignorance. To some extent, it's a mix of both. So, I'm a normal human being like everybody else. I think that's what people really resonate with about me is like, I don't claim to be an expert. I don't even want you to believe anything I'm saying. All I want to do is just share my observations, my experiences, encourage you maybe to look at things differently that could be helpful, that was helpful for me. And the reason I think why my YouTube took off so much is because I never frame myself as like the guy that has it all figured out. It's more so like the guy who's exactly like you, who's maybe like a step or two ahead of you, or just has different perspectives than you.
Yeah, I like to call it, or I've heard someone call it being a guide, not a guru. And I think that's an incredible way to frame it. And all of the favorite people that I like paying attention to online have that same mentality of, look, I'm just a human being. I'm on this journey and I want to share this information and it could help you, but I'm not higher than you in any totem pole, which I think is way different from how it was back in the day where you had different hierarchy, like a celebrity was on a higher plane than a normal person. And that's kind of shifted. And I'm curious why you think that shift has occurred.
Well, the word relationship means to relate. And there's just nothing relatable at all about success. Like, how in any way, shape, or form is the average Joe going to relate to Maseratis and BMWs and all this fancy like celebrity stuff? Like, what do you notice about music, by the way? What is most music? When you listen to rap, they're talking about how they overcame the struggle, all the problems with the hood. Like, very rarely are songs like 50 Cent, I got money in the bank. Like, those songs don't climb to the top 100. It's one of the most popular songs of all time. All I Want for Christmas Is You, because that relates to everybody. If you're in a relationship, if you're not in a relationship, it relates to everybody. So a big reason we're seeing sort of, I guess, I don't even know if decentralization is the word, but the traditional gatekeepers are gone, right? Like, we all can post content, and when people just saw these regular guys just like them, but maybe like a step or two ahead, especially a huge factor was, I think, the fitness revolution. Huge. I know how you just talked to like Rob Lipset, like he was a big part of that, of just sharing his life and showing people, like he was part of that fitness revolution. At least in my head, he's one of like the pioneers of that fitness revolution. But people love that, like just a guy just like them who's figured some stuff out. Not everything, some stuff, and he's sharing that some stuff. I think people really relate to that.
And it's like that will create a new level of gatekeepers, right? Because you have like Mark Zuckerberg and Jack serving now as the new gatekeepers for information. And how do you think that's good? What's the next layer after that? Is it complete decentralization? Are we ready for that? Is that possible? What do you think?
I think that goes beyond my scope of understanding, because usually I like to speak on things I've like spent time formulating an opinion on. But what I do want to say, going back to persuasion, is on the unethical side of persuasion, what they use is one of the most potent and dangerous forms of seduction. Every startup, all of them, Uber, Facebook, all of them, what do? They no rules. It's all free, and will show your post to 100% of your audience, just so they get everybody addicted. They have people spending hours of their life like building these brands, these followings. Then once the entire world is addicted, you literally take it away. We're only going to show your posts to 10% of your audience unless you pay for ads. Now we're going to start censoring you. Now you got to follow our guidelines or else you got to go somewhere else. It is the most potent form, or one of the most deadliest forms of seduction. And that's why everyone who like thinks the whole playing hard to get thing works is an idiot. Like, playing hard to get works on such a small percentage of people. If you really, for women, want to be dangerous, you play to a man, like we talked about earlier. A man's number one thing is his competence and his capability for his self-worth. You might not even consciously know that, but that's why men don't like failure and rejection. even if they don't know why they don't like it, the negative emotion is a reflection of not having competence, not having capability, which ultimately can translate to, and the subconscious will interpret as not good enough, failure as a man. So this whole hard to get nonsense just doesn't work. I mean, it works on a small percentage of people with problems. And we all have another problem with motivation. I'm going to all sorts of tangents, but I promise I'm going to wrap it all together. Another problem I have with motivation is that there are 6 human needs and we all rank them in different order, right? So someone might rank connection and fitting in as number 1 and achievement as number 0. And someone that ranks achievement as number 1 and connection as number 0, totally different things motivate them. And back to this whole deception thing, like if it was, they really wanted to be potent, they'd follow the model of like Uber and all these people where they get everyone addicted, then raise the price. Essentially, you like play to his ego. I don't even know how we got on this. I'm not the deception guy, but it's just fascinating to me. This is not instruction. It's more so just observation and theory, by the way. I'm not the deception guy at all. But like, I mean, just to me, it would make most logical sense to like play into that ego, make him feel like you trust his capability, you trust his competence, you make him feel like he's the man. And then when he's addicted and just like reliant on that, because again, until people do the work, they're going to be reliant on things. Now his entire sense of self-worth belongs to her. And then she can pull away and then she pretty much owns him. So playing hard to get just does not work on the front end.
Yeah, this is what the social media platforms have done, right? And you described so beautifully how exactly they've done it. How do you think about that as someone who posts their stuff on social media?
Good question. I mean, this is actually a really good question. I could take this somewhere. So there was a very brief period where I was like looking into conspiracy theories and all that, but then I quickly came to the realization like that is just not the solution, right? Darkness is the absence of light. You can't delete the darkness. You can't remove the darkness. You can only add more light. So if these social media people are the evil forces and stuff, they're not going to be defeated by complaining. If they're going to be defeated, they have to be defeated in the same way Napoleon was defeated, which is people will begin to retreat. Like what the Russians did is they retreated and retreated and retreated, which gave Napoleon the sense like, I'm closing in on him, I'm closing in on him. And they just burned down all the cities and resources. And Napoleon was way into Russia and no resources. So thousands of his troops are dying. And then they mutiny and they're like, we have to get out of here. There's winter, we have to leave. But guess what? The road back is stripped of resources. Out of all the men he went with, he returned home with 10% of the people. So here's what I'm trying to say is evil is not going to be defeated by making them stop doing the bad things. It's only a matter of supply and demand. They're only supplying toxic pharmaceuticals because there is a demand for those pharmaceuticals. Like if nobody ever bought anything unhealthy again, they literally just would not be able to afford producing it. The reason why we're slowly seeing this gradual increase in health foods is just a matter of supply and demand. Now there is more demand, therefore people produce more supply. So if you cut off the supply line or you cut off the demand, which cuts off the supply line, that is how you overcome evil. You don't complain about it and make them stop. So what I'm trying to say is also, I'm not too concerned about getting like banned or anything because I just don't point out like things like that. Like I'll do my best to stay on the platform to a certain extent. Like you can't just completely repress people, but I don't think that's how the fight is won. The fight is won by elevating people and adding the light, as opposed to like telling people everything that's wrong, which leaves no practical solution. So it is, in my opinion, the way it's going to be defeated is with just cutting off the supply chain. Like all the movies in Hollywood, for example, and mainstream media and stuff like that, people are watching it less and less and less, going to YouTube, podcasters, TikTok. We are draining the supply line. Eventually mainstream media will be nothing, especially when you and me are like 40 and 50 and the older generation that watches it is gone. I mean, the supply chain's gone. What are they going to do? Force people to watch it?
Yeah, that's a great point. But then I also think about Mark Cuban, who created this streaming service His first venture was with a streaming service for sports, and he created, I believe, in 1995, sometime around then. And he said, "There's no way that cable TV is still going to be around in 20 years. That'd be crazy. Like, this is the future. Streaming is the future." So I guess what I'm trying to say is it possible that the mainstream finds a way to survive because it's so ingrained in our DNA? Like, why does anyone watch cable TV today?
Hmm. Well, like I said, there's again, this is all just my opinion. Please, nobody believe anything I'm saying without thinking about it. Like I said, power is a double-edged sword. So there's angels, demons, good guys, bad guys. Um, Either side is not perfect, right? Like I explain my strengths in communication, but that doesn't mean I'm perfect. And the people on the bad guy side, they're not perfect either. They make horrible mistakes if you actually analyze their flaws. So if you go way back to the origins of propaganda and manipulating people with the media, it boils down to media was actually back in the day, I'm talking like the 20s and the 30s. News was actually news. It was just telling you what happened without attempting to associate any meaning to it and letting the audience come up with their own meaning. Journalism was then the result of the news. We're going to look at what happened and just ask questions to get more clear about the truth. That's how news and journalism started. So then people, the propagandists, I guess we could call the negative side of the equation, were like, we need to input intermittent like propaganda, right? We need to slowly implement beliefs into people. I mean, one of the most obvious examples is with smoking. Only men were smoking. It wasn't considered feminine to smoke. So they put out this huge campaign and associated women smoking cigarettes with women who refuse to be oppressed. And it makes them tougher and free. They literally called it torches of freedom if you look it up. And just one of the subtle ways in which propaganda was slowly introduced. And then from there, they were like, America, we cannot progress unless we transition from a needs to a wants-based culture. No, because people back then would only buy what they need. So they needed to train people through advertising, media, celebrities, movies, product placements to want things that they just don't need. And so the point I'm getting to is it kept going and going and going. And instead of it being intermittently placed, what happens now, or what happened is, if you look at modern day news and journalism, it is not even, there's no ratio anymore. It's not like 50% news, 50% propaganda. It is literally a PR distribution agency, 100%. like they shot themselves in the foot because like there's no more value in there. Like back in the day, they would at least make like cool documentaries and news. And at this point, they've just overdone it, which, by the way, it concerns people, right? People are like, man, this is so scary. It's like flat out just manipulations, flat out. But you have to look at it also in the same way. Why do they have to grip so tightly? Because they're losing grasp of control. The tighter the grip, it means the more actually control is slipping out of their grasp. So although we as the people are uncomfortable in that grip, it is a sign of progress in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. And you raised such an interesting point because my grandparents love the news. That's how they get their news. And they believed when they grew up, they got the truth from the news. And now they have been wired to still get their information that way. The question I'm trying to get is like, that's a bias on their part, if we're willing to give it that. And what biases might we be falling into that 50 years from now are going to harm us in seeking the truth?
This is a very good question, and I'm going to take it a place you might not expect. So let's go back to the whole angels and demons thing, right? You know you're dealing with a demon when it's direct and an angel is indirect, right? So like I said earlier, what to think versus how to think. So with the mainstream, because through our education system and just all sorts of other various factors of the way society is built, people's primary mechanism is what to think instead of how to think. Remember and regurgitate. If you remember school, remember, regurgitate, remember, regurgitate. Very little was done in like the actual development of intuition and critical thinking and problem solving. So that when presented with data, people don't even think to question it. They're waiting to be told what to think. Like we said earlier, what is a belief? Cause, effect, meaning. So what's happening is in the what to think mode, people are just waiting for the meaning to be fed to them. And I bring up the angels and demons thing is because Mother Nature is a feminine energy, right? Mother Nature, Father Time. Time is chronological. Nature is spontaneous and constantly changing. What I mean by that is it's going to be indirect. Like you will never be told, this is what you need to do if it's a good force. You'll be given clues. You're going to notice a YouTube video you never clicked on, or maybe you get a text from someone. The way the angels work is, like I said, also the way feminine energy works. It's never going to be direct, but it's going to lead you to the conclusion. It wants you to think, because it would violate the law of free will if you were just told what to do, because then you would be a slave. The reason why you're here is to navigate through free will and make choices. If you were just told what to do, what does that mean? You're a slave. So angels don't want you to be a slave. They're not going to tell you what to do. So when people say, I got a message from angels to do this, I don't know, questionable. People would call that demons. But if that makes sense, what I'm trying to say is it will always be indirect. They'll give you 2 + 2 so that you have to think and grow as a person to figure it out on your own. You'll notice things that you normally didn't notice. Maybe you see an opportunity that you normally didn't see. Or you remember something about a friend telling you something, or you pick up a book you bought but never read. These little clues of intuition that lead you to come up with the conclusion on your own.
I'm so curious what clues of intuition have shaped your life personally.
Well, like I said earlier, right? It's just like a muscle. It's a skill that you develop over time. And as it becomes more advanced, it's crazy. I mean, just sometimes there are certain days when I'm just really into it. I can just run totally on intuition. To give you like an example of yesterday, I was just typing an article and like taking notes, and I was really deep on this concept of something. And then for some reason, I just get a hunch that like, oh yeah, that reminds me of a book I bought but never read. So I just pick up the book and just randomly open to a page, and the page I open up to is exactly what I'm talking about in the thing that I'm writing.
Whoa.
This is like a little example. Hard to believe, I understand, but on a more logical and practical sense, it's like how in traffic we only notice cars that are significant to us. So maybe you're the car your friend drives, or your dream car, or your girlfriend's car, or your parents' car. You actually take an extra second to actually acknowledge the existence of that car and remember it. Every other car that drives by, you can't even remember. Like name the 17th car you saw yesterday. You can't. It's useless to you. So in the same way with intuition, like when we set these intentions, we start noticing things we otherwise normally wouldn't have noticed.
So the trick to getting better intuition is to set an intention. What else would you recommend to improve one's intuition?
Practicing using external resources as supplemental instead of requirements, and like your foundation of where you go to. So before going on Google, before going on that, you want to make sure you accurately diagnose the symptoms of the problem. You look at the equation, you come up with hypotheses, then you confirm it by looking up things online. That way, instead of seeking somebody else to tell you what the solution to your problem is, you're coming up with solutions on your own and then supplementing it with other solutions from other people to create a personalized solution for yourself. That way you are thinking instead of seeking to be told what to think.
Do you ever feel like you have times when your intuition is blocked? And what do you do in those times?
Oh, all the time. All the time. Um, and that's where things like that we touched on, like discipline and strategy come in. So I know I said like I don't really use strategy, I don't use anything, but that is sort of like then your floor, right? I still have some marketing strategies and concepts that you use on the days that you're not feeling it. Like for a salesman, that would be a script. Now, a high level salesman is not going to be reading off a script word for word. He's going to be able to adapt in the moment and be in the flow. But it's for those days where he's just really not feeling it and something's going on that he can default to his like systems and strategies and stuff like that. So for me, I like using them as the floor instead of the ceiling.
Yeah, that makes sense. Dude, when I hear you talk, there's always such a spiritual undertone to everything you say. You talk about angels and demons and talk about the soul and reincarnation. When did your spiritual journey begin?
That's another good question. It's funny because like I actually don't consider myself that much of like the spiritual guy or like the dogma guy, but like it just you eventually come down those paths when you go deep enough into certain problems. Like I said, like I analyze and look at things and try to come up with solutions. And also sometimes it's just much easier to use that type of terminology. Like again, the reason why old texts like the Bible and stuff like that, instead of it being a direct instruction book, what is it? It is stories. And then through the stories, through the symbolism, you think as an active participant and conclude the meaning instead of having your free will imposed upon and just told what to think. That's why people love movies. What is a movie? Symbols and characters we resonate with and struggle and stuff we relate with so much on a subconscious level, but without actually directly telling us, oh, you got to overcome struggle. You got to do this and do that. So with that in mind, also, I feel like sometimes like a really good movie will motivate you more than any sort of tactical discipline type of thing.
So when did your spiritual journey begin?
Oh yeah, I forgot about the question. Um, I mean, I think forever, because like I said, I reverse engineer my experiences, and then sometimes you just can't explain it with logic. And I try really hard to like figure it out because I just love that stuff. Like it's like cryptography, which is deciphering embedded secret messages. To me, it's like just a fun puzzle. Like it's not even like a means to an end. Literally, the act in itself is enjoyable. And I guess to really answer the question, it's like sometimes when you're looking at other resources, like I said, as supplemental, you notice like, whoa, this conclusion that I came to actually lines up with like a direct Bible quote. Like a lot of the stuff I said here, if I wanted to like be way more spiritual and leaning into it, I could have used Bible quotes, right? So like when I explained you only acknowledge the things, the cards that you see, I could have just said seek and you will find, right? Like you only see things that you're actually seeking or have significance to you.
Yeah, it's just fascinating because I'm curious if like you were raised to go to the church or raised with a Bible in your hand, or you just developed it because you were seeing all these constant problems, or like what was that like as a child use?
Yeah, definitely no like spiritual upbringing whatsoever.
Wow.
Not even like very religious at all, but just delved into it out of fascination.
Yeah. Fascinating, man, because there's always a spiritual text to everything you seem to write and talk about. And one thing I also notice about you is you don't want to be branded as anything. You don't want to be known as the spiritual guy. You don't want to be known as the YouTube guy. You don't want to be known as the e-commerce guy. Where does that come from?
So I mean, it goes back to like I said, right? Power is a double-edged sword. So it's a strength of mine and it's simultaneously a weakness of mine. So on one level, just I guess my raw personality type wants to be very individual. Like the most disgusting thing to me, and by the way, do not believe this, come to your own conclusions, think for yourself. This is just me personally, the way I am wired, is like the most disgusting thing for me is to just do what everybody else is doing and just to be another commodity doing it. Like, which is why like when I came onto YouTube or Twitter, my goal is to bring perspectives that like nobody has ever brought. And I don't even seek perspectives like for that sake. It's just how my brain thinks. It's just how my brain is wired. So I take elements from everywhere and combine them into just, I guess, what I would consider new solutions.
Yeah. How much of that is comes from your ego of wanting an original to be an original thinker?
Oh man. I mean, I'd say some of it like is wired just like how I am wired, but definitely there's an ego aspect to it. Oh, totally an ego aspect to it. Um, yeah, but like I said, it is a double-edged sword. So the strength is like when people do discover me or my content, it's like, whoa, I've never seen this before. There's nobody else like this guy. So it led to a very high percentage of people that like follow me after only like one or two exposures to my content without even using any keywords or anything. It's just that fact. But then there's the other end of the spectrum, the negative side of it, which is sometimes you can go so far in that individualism that you're just not relatable to anyone. Now, in a broad sense, I don't think that's ever affected me, but definitely has in like a micro sense. When you try so hard to be like different and cool, like then there's just nothing in common with people. And then what are you supposed to do? There's
What do you
nothing in
mean?
common.
What would be in the micro sense? What's an example of that?
Like, for example, personal friendships, right? So, like, people went to school. I didn't go to school. people, I don't know, like do certain church activities. I did not do certain church activities. People work a traditional job. I did not work a traditional job. And like, I wanted everything about me to just be different. Not even consciously. So I guess we're just unconscious based on like the way I think.
Mm.
But you see what I like, what I keep saying, how like every power in itself is not anything, but the operator of that power determines if it's going to be negative or positive.
And another thing that I've noticed about you is just the empathy piece. And you mentioned it before. Where does your empathy come from?
Good question. I mean, I think maybe it's natural for that. I have like no root origin of where it comes from, but to me, it's just like, because again, I'm like 50% creative and 50% analytical. So the reason why I haven't done like music and singing and stuff like that is 'cause I'm not that far down the role of creative, but I'm still far enough to like create unique solutions with language and use my analytical side as like my musical notes in a way. Taking
Hmm.
musical notes from everything, from spirituality, from physics, from math, from geometry, from cryptography, everything, and then use those musical notes to create an entirely new melody is kind of like how I operate.
Dude, that's so fascinating that you put it that way because that's what I think this podcast is. I think it's creating from all these different sources and texts and people and bring it together in a way that only I possibly can, which turns into some sort of song or an album. And then it gets interpreted by people and it's like, whoa, that's interesting, or wow, that sucks, or the different versions of songs is how I think of a podcast. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and there's actually then also like like an energy associated with it. Right, here's also one way that this is the one of the biggest compliments for the individualistic type. So you know how people will say like, oh, he's a Jeff Bezos type, or oh, he's a Steve Jobs type. When something is like, oh, he's the Danny Miranda type, he reminds me of Danny Miranda, which is when like you're the innovator, the trendsetter. That's like one of the biggest compliments for individualistic types.
100%. And it's like, you're not going to be the next person. You're just going to be the first yourself. And that always hits harder. And that's your truth, because how could you possibly be someone else? You have completely different DNA, completely. But the thing is, if you start doing things so similar to them, trying to be like that person, you then all of a sudden can get put in that archetype and try to be that person. But if you could just be yourself, if you could just attach to who you are at your core, you can then come to your own insights and be compared to yourself.
You've brought up such a good point that I really do want to touch on is when we're not getting the results we want, when we're struggling and just things aren't going our way, the unconscious, subconscious feeling behind that is like, I don't like who I am. I need to be somebody else. What is that an energy of? It's escapism. I need to go somewhere else. I need to leave here. So, in one way that manifests is again like drugs, alcohol, things that escape you from your current state of reality. But then, of course, also, which happens a lot, again, I need to be somebody else is what people think. And in that what to think mode of thinking, hop on YouTube, hop on Instagram. Look what this guy looks like. He's getting results. Let me be more like him because I don't like me is sort of how people get into these loops. And then they are fucked if they go that route. Trust me, man. Like I've tried. I'm a good, I can perform, I can act. You'll never be as good as if you're being yourself. Like if you are the funny guy and like you're just naturally a funny person, you have that wiring in your brain, you will never ever be like this, like, oh, I'm the tough, like fuck it up guy. If you have to pretend, it just looks so stupid. And the way I always describe it, the best way I can describe it, I feel, is with posture. When somebody is doing good posture, they're doing looking like an idiot. Like, because you know what I'm saying? You've seen people like they try to walk so straight. And then you're like, why are you doing good posture? Good posture is something you are. You take the time to build the muscles. That means you just have good posture without having to do anything, if that makes sense. Like, and that again, that's what I talked about at the beginning about being compelling instead of being convincing, nurturing your garden instead of chasing the butterfly. The posture is just another analogy of explaining that. You put in the work to develop the muscles to have good posture, so you don't have to waste a ton of energy doing good posture. So when you align to your strengths and you know who you are, it's way better than trying to be someone else in which you'll look like that person doing fake posture.
What are some of the the cues that someone is trying to be like someone else?
If something, again, I don't want to misinterpret this because difficulty is a necessary part of life, but just absurd amounts of difficulty to where it's just not proportional to the returns that you're getting. Like, you'll know pretty quickly if like you're more of a creative as opposed to a numbers guy. Like, and you'll feel it when you come home. Like, people should, here's the big thing, right? Let's get into this. So like I was saying earlier, when you do the thing that just comes naturally to you and is like your primary thing, you actually get energized by it because it's not taking energy away from you to do it. You are literally doing it not as a means to an end, but just for the love of doing it in and of itself. So it doesn't take away your energy. A huge sign that you can tell is just always being drained and low energy. Assuming, like we talked about earlier, you get blood work done, you make sure you're checked out there, then you can start looking, you see the next layer of analysis is then you can start questioning, maybe I'm just doing things that are just not aligned to who I am. I don't mean that in a spiritual sense as like some crazy spiritual expedition that you have to figure out. Like, no, I'm just like, just keep it simple, reverse engineer some of your wins and some of your losses and do a personality test, get fixing this ASAP. And I mean, it's just crazy, the whole thing. You see how excited I get about it? Because like these things have changed my life so drastically.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said. I want to underscore it about doing things that give you energy. You will know it's clearly not about the external when what you're doing for the sake of doing it is giving you more energy. I'm going to be so stoked after this conversation is over because I'm so stoked right now. Like this is bringing me so much joy for the sake of doing it. And it's like, what are the activities in your life that you couldn't live and not do, and you need to get out there, and that those activities just constantly bring you energy time and time again? That's where all the juice of life is from. And if you can focus in on those activities, then you're going to be the best version of yourself possible. And I also want to note an important point of that is to give yourself 90 days to try it out, that activity. I sucked my first 100 podcast episodes. Not sucked, but when you go to the gym for the first 100 times, you're not going to be the strongest person there. It's impossible. But you have to try it out to see if that form of exercise is the one for you. So give yourself some discipline to hone in on the activity, but don't judge before you've actually given yourself a chance to see if you enjoy it or not.
Oh, 100%. Like, I mean, soccer has been a huge part of my life, but the first maybe 3 months I played soccer, 90 days, as you said, it physically was painful to play because I used to be a football player, American football. And like my technique was just so trash. I would like keep pulling ligaments and stuff and it was horrible. But what kept me going was, again, I was in a group of friends and like it was just normal to go every day. But then once I got through that period of resistance, as you mentioned, and I actually became good at it, it really became a mode of self-expression. It was so fun. I'm not even kidding, this was our summer, like when I was a kid. Wake up at like 10 o'clock, we'd all go to the gas station, buy a big ass 24 pack of water, lay it down on the field. We would play from like 11:30 a.m. until like 4 or 5 p.m. all freaking day long, and then go home and play FIFA, more soccer video games. But that would have never happened if I didn't go through that like 90-day period where it was just uncomfortable and not fun to play.
And what would have happened if you had said, okay, I'm tearing my ligaments, this isn't fun anymore, I'm going to quit? What would have happened? How much joy would you have missed out on?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's really important, I think, just to give yourself a chance at finding joy and purpose and meaning, but you have to be willing to embrace a little bit of a sucky beginning to see if it's really for you.
Oh, totally. And I mean, I'm choking. I'm so excited. It's like we talked about in the beginning, right? So really excited. You're mostly just going to be hurt from your ego because you're going to be reflected a lack of competence and capability. That's what's really hurting you more than the failure. It's just more of an identity thing. Like, wow,
Yeah.
I'm not competent. I'm not capable. Therefore, I'm not good enough. Like the actual pain of going through it, again, it's just ridiculous. Like sit down and think about it. Like you were literally trying to, I know people are listening to this are going to resonate with it, so it's important to me. Like you were trying to make a personal brand that is literally just giving value to people. You were trying to create a product that is helping people. Like it's not scary when you think about it. What is scary is being reflected back the possibility that you're not competent, that you're not capable. If people complain or this or that, that is what we're afraid of. We're afraid of the meaning. We're not actually afraid of the effect. There's no danger. We're afraid of the meaning because that technically is danger to our identity and our ego.
And if you get that feedback that's negative, you can then use that as a positive, as use that as a way to improve. But you can't, if you're judging yourself prior to putting yourself out there or judging yourself that you got a bit of negative feedback, then how are you ever going to grow? And so this goes back to something we talked about in our first podcast appearance together of like using the failures for good and understanding that the failure is part of the process and that it can help you grow to a new, even better, stronger version of yourself.
I mean, the first time I heard that concept, right, I was dumb. I was a kid. I was like, okay, buddy, positivity guy. Like, okay, failure's cool, buddy. Like, it just sounds really dumb at first to like people that are not, haven't lived that experience. But like I said at the beginning, it's the weirdest thing. It eventually will come to a point where like you appreciate the failures as much as the successes because inside of the failure is the feedback and is the data. And if you can extract and polish those gems of wisdom, that is what actually gives you more confidence or competence, confidence, and capability. I mean, when you win, you're just being reflected back what you can do. But when you lose, you get revealed the blind spot of how you can better what you do.
Dude, that's a bar. That's an absolute bar. So is there anything else we'd like to discuss today?
But whatever you feel like. Whatever. I mean, you're doing a great job asking questions. So
I appreciate that, man.
It, man.
I appreciate that. No, I think it's a perfect time to wrap it up because I'm better off for having this conversation. And I hope people who are listening as well. I mean, I can't wait. I'm really excited to listen to this again because I know there's parts of it that I missed or that I'm going to learn from the second time. So thank you, Yus. Where can people connect with you further?
Yeah, right now, mostly on Twitter. So YOUSXP, all one word, USXP. Instagram, I pretty much never post there, but it's just YOUS. And then my website, which is now back up, just at YOUS.co, use.co.
Love it. All linked below. Thank you, Yus. This has been a true pleasure. I'm really grateful for you as always. And to continued success on your end and keep up the content because I absolutely love it.
Thank you, man. It was amazing. Thank you for having me.